And welcome. You are listening to Three Women here on CIUT 89.5 FM. Your host, Sherry DeNovo. I'm MPP Parkdale High Park. And today it's our A-team. It's Andrea Houston and Ashley Csanady at the second half of the show. And we're going to be talking about a little bit of everything. We're going to be talking about, of course, politics as they're being played out, if you can call it that, in the United States. And, of course, what's happening here, too. So welcome, Drea.
Thank you.
One thing I should say that's changed in your life is you are now teaching at Ryerson. You're teaching a queer studies, very first of its kind. Tell us about it.
It's incredibly exciting. I was asked to develop this course from scratch, and it was a lot of work over the summer developing this course. It's a little bit of history, queer history. It's a little bit of journalism, advocacy journalism 101, and it's also activism 101 and social justice 101. What I found so far is the students really, and most students really don't have a lot of queer history background from school. And so we've been laying a lot of groundwork talking about Stonewall and the bathhouse raids, talking about the AIDS pandemic, and moving into talk about things like First Nation sovereignty, Two-Spirit, Black Lives Matter, homo nationalism, and all things queer. And it's been really, really exciting, and the students are really enjoying it. And going to be putting out into the world some really activist journalists who want to change the world, make it a better place.
And we'll end up, we have to say it, we'll end up possibly facing jail time like Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! I mean, that's really quite shocking. And that's just to talk about journalism for a second.
Absolutely.
Maybe you can fill in the listeners on what's going on there in the Dakotas. So
the Dakota Access Pipeline, the protest that's happening right now, is the largest Indigenous uprising in American history, since colonization. That's how critical this protest is. And it's bringing together tribes from all across Turtle Island, which is what North America's originally called. There's no borders when it comes to this protest. So there's Canadian First Nation activists, activists from South America, and they're really pushing back on this pipeline, which is connected to Canadian pipelines, and
with lots of violent resistance.
Lots of violent
obviously.
resistance. We saw the private security company actually released dogs on protesters not too long ago. They've got armed militia, helicopters, and Amy Goodman has been one of the very few journalists who've been on the front lines documenting this, and what critical footage she has. So important and so critical that they've actually tried to stop her from covering it and laid charges against her. And not just her. There's other reporters and journalists and filmmakers who are facing charges as well, trespassing charges. I mean, it blows your mind when you think about that.
Shades of things to come with our own pipeline development on the West Coast. We're looking at Haida up, doing the same kinds of backlash really against just basically running roughshod over their land. Not to mention the pipeline East-West or Keystone XL for that matter, which is still on the books.
It can't just be Amy Goodman covering these things. We have to have a concerted effort from media to turn away from their big banks and corporate investors and say, this is legitimate news, this is newsworthy, and we need to cover it. This is the future of humanity, is how critical and important this story is.
Yeah, it's really actually quite shocking that it's not being covered.
Yeah, the blackout is so evident and so obvious.
So moving on from journalism into what journalists cover, I suppose. I mean, this is like a cesspool. I have to say the words. The American election. It started off, and I was pleasantly shocked with the Bernie Sanders campaign and the fact that somebody was calling themselves a socialist. Here, of course, I'm a raging socialist, so I thought that was great. And there were lots and lots of support. The word wasn't dirty anymore. A whole new kind of politics. And we've ended up with a whole new other kind of politics with Donald Trump, which is It's just actually shocking. Like, it's unbelievable.
It is shocking to hearing it, but I think Trump is really the manifestation of everything that we've been leading up till now. Like, if you read the Republican platform, he actually fits in this narrative completely. He really is. You know, what the Republican Party has birthed out. You know, he is the perfect Republican baby. I know they like to distance themselves from him, but really he is just saying what they've all been hinting and referencing for years.
Yeah, it's all there. Rape culture's there. Racism's there.
Yep. Racism is so embedded within the Republican history that if you go back to the Southern strategy,
how do they have people of color as members? I want to.
Well, there's not many. Not many.
But they group them around him. And it's. I mean, the rape culture aspect of this is really quite shocking. I was impressed, actually, I have to say, and I don't say this often about something that comes out of the Obama mouths, but with Michelle Obama's really moving speech about what it's like to be female in rape culture and what this does. Certainly the best thing so far that's come out of this election campaign from either party. But I mean, it really is, again, shocking to see all these women up there who still support Trump.
10 now. We're thinking about talking about the women coming forward. But yeah, seeing women support Trump, and they're all blonde, right?
And then all the women that, of course, he's attacked.
10 of them now. There is 10 that have come forward.
I know. It's, again, that this could be in the White House is pretty shocking. But, then on the other hand, I read a meme that said, it's sort of like watching parents fighting over, as a child, watching your parents fight over your custody and really wanting to go live with grandma.
Yeah.
Which I thought kind of summarized it pretty well. It was like, ooh,
Because really, Trump's a monster. I think we can all agree that Trump is a monster.
Oh, he's a fascist.
But really, Clinton scares me as well. I mean, almost just as much, frankly, just in different ways. She scares me in different ways.
Well, she's the placator. She's the Wall Street gal. She's the
the warmonger, fracking.
Yeah, I mean, and what's sad, I have to say, is to see Bernie now coming out and saying, you have to vote for her if you want action against climate change. And where is she on the pipeline in the Dakotas?
She's not mentioned it. She's never been asked
anything.
And I have not. Yeah. I've looked for any comment. A journalist who maybe just stuck a microphone in her face at an event. I haven't seen anything. Yeah. So I don't know whether her handlers have deliberately tried to engineer her not having to speak about that because of her Wall Street backers, as you say. I don't know.
It's anyway, that's shocking. And again, it shows the absolute lack of any real kind of democracy in the American process now. I mean,
you've got the people. Yeah, but
you've got gerrymandered states where basically a Republican's going to get in even if the Republican had four legs. And you've got a situation where money simply buys you a ticket in, not experience, has nothing to do with who you are, has everything to do with the amount of money you can get together. This is what you end up with.
And racist voting patterns, right? We have a legacy in the United States of them, passing racist voting law after racist voting law to the point where there are huge swaths of people of black and people of color who can't vote, who are completely shut out of the electoral process. Not to mention their corrupt justice system. So you have mostly black and brown men who can't vote because they've got a criminal record. I mean, they've paid their debt to society. They should be able to vote again. But all this was done to deliberately cut huge swaths of the population off from the democratic system.
Yeah, John Oliver did a great bit on that. He also took on, I don't know if you saw the latest from him, but he also took on Jill Stein and the Libertarian as well.
That was hilarious.
It was pretty funny. Who knew she sang in a band at one point?
Right?
So, I mean, again, you look at the choices and it just is seriously depressing.
It is. This is the best they have. These are the best people that the United States can put forward for leadership. Come on.
I know. Shocking. Truly shocking. And I guess it makes for good TV, so it's selling papers, but that's about all it's doing.
Selling papers, but selling the country down the toilet.
That's true. That's true. So either way, it's going to be scary. I mean,
I think it's almost more scary what happens if Trump loses, like that day after the election, is he going to call for,
Militia.
burn the White House down?
Yeah, well, there was just a militia plot uncovered in the United States, in Kansas. So, these armed groups exist across the states. This is pretty terrifying in terms of talk about terrorism, in homegrown terrorism.
But they're white.
Unleashed.
You don't call them terrorists.
That's
right.
Unleashed down there. I guess as a feminist too, it's kind of, if we get the first and it looks like we might get the first woman president. It's like you want to be joyful about it, but you're not really joyful about it. I don't know. Like as a feminist, we kind of wanted to be more excited about this. What would you say about that?
Oh, she just doesn't represent my feminism. My feminism isn't about war and silencing people who are trying to make the world a better place. If you listen, I've been following a lot of the WikiLeaks dumps.
Yeah,
and I know
tell us about those, because honestly, I don't think a lot of people have been following that.
Because it's been a little overshadowed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And in any other normal election, this would be front page news. This would probably have crippled her campaign. These are really bad. Some of these emails.
Yeah, tell us about them, because honestly, I don't think listeners have really. Most people haven't heard about the WikiLeaks email scandals
for good reason.
Hillary.
So there's, these are emails that are coming from her campaign chair. These are John Podesta. These are emails back and forth between him and other people. And so basically says flat out that she has a public position and a private position on issues. And so she presents herself to the world a certain way, and she has a private presentation of her views, and a completely polar opposite view that she's presenting to the world on key issues like climate change. In fact, in one email, she actually tells climate activists who are desperately trying to get her position on things to get a life. She actually says that, get a life, and that she doesn't understand why anybody would be against fracking, and that her mission is to promote fracking around the world. We can't have a leader who does that, a leader with that much power at this critical point in history when we need to be reining in our fossil fuel development and resource extraction. The last thing we need is somebody with that great power to be pretty upfront and open about the fact that she wants to promote it further around the world and thinks climate activists should, quote, get a life. That worries me.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, if you've just tuned in, you are listening to Three Women. We have Andrea Houston in studio and now teaching a course on queer activism herself and queer journalism at Ryerson. And we're also going to be speaking a little later in the show with Ashley Csanady of the National Post.
And also Ryerson. She's
and also
teaching at
Ryerson as well, about just politics in general, kind of a little recap, because we haven't done a recap show. Certainly, we're always interested in hearing what you have to say. Please do tweet. It's just at me, which is at CHERIDINOVO, Sherry DeNovo. You can also, of course, tweet at Andrea Houston, HOUSTON, or Ashley Csanady. I believe it's A Csanady, so CSANADAY.
I think it's just DY.
EY. Okay, we'll get back to you on that one when Ashley's on the show.
It.
Yeah, just Google it. Yeah, what the hell? Anyway, so I always interested in what you think about political issues, and always interested in what your ideas for upcoming shows on Three Women. This is Feminist Radio. There's no doubt about it. We feature only the voices of women. What other show can say that? We had one man on once over the years, and that was the White Ribbon Campaign.
Yeah.
We made him an honorary woman for the day. So, yes, we're feminists, but yeah, we're not. Some days we're just not feeling it for Hillary. We're just not feeling it for Hillary. Let's move a little north of the border now, where everything is sunny and where everything is wonderful in Ottawa. And we have a handsome young prime minister who's just the perfect antidote for a weary of conservatives country. What do you think?
Well, again, not my feminism. My feminism doesn't include selling arms to Saudi Arabia. My feminism doesn't include, stabbing Indigenous communities in the back.
Yeah, talk about that. I actually got the figures on that the other day. When Cindy Blackstock was really upset about, Trudeau keeping his promise around education, for example, if First Nations promised what she was asking, got 50% as much, a check for half.
These are kids.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And they get $2,000 less per student than white kids, than kids in other educational systems. This is shocking. And of course, the yet another fossil fuel project in BC.
Yep. Climate bomb is
Yeah.
how they're describing it.
Yeah, and again, says okay to that, says okay to the Kinder Morgan, says okay to Keystone XL, says okay to all the pipelines.
And all of these development, all of these projects, which we hear jobs, these are just decimating First Nation land, like sacred land where people are still living. Like, this is colonization in action, right?
Yeah.
This is destroying people's access to clean water, hunting, fishing. Like, Trudeau
Mind you,
may go
it's
to a
very
grocery store,
clear-
but they don't.
It's very clear from the fossil fuel apologists that they're hoping to buy off some of those First
Yeah.
Nations too. So it's the divide and conquer scenario there.
But they can't
so
buy them
beware.
all, right?
No, absolutely. And
It's the same that happened with De Beers mine and all those areas.
And clearly, this is bad for the climate. We're also C-51
Yeah,
still on the books, civil rights. So there was a promise broken that they were going to at least amend that, do something with it. Haven't seen anything happening with that.
It's sort of disappeared, hasn't it?
And as a feminist issue, the sex trade worker bill, C-36,
still on the books.
Still on the books. And for all of you out there who wanted to see the legalization of marijuana, hey, not happening. In fact, it's still criminal, and there's tens of thousands of arrests being made across
And
the
meanwhile,
country.
there's that new report that just came out from Human Rights Watch, which is a groundbreaking report, which says that it's calling for the legalization of all drugs.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot keep filling our prisons with people charged for possession, petty crimes like possession, addicted to hard narcotics like opiates. We need to get these people some treatment. We don't need to stick them in a
Yep.
cage.
And it's proven to work. I mean, Portugal's done it, and they've had
Exactly.
phenomenal results from that program. So, really interesting. I mean, you get a kind of a chit to and rehab if you've got an issue. You don't get jail
Reduction.
time.
These are not new concepts.
Yep. So, but again, this was a campaign promise: legalize marijuana, and still,
Still people are being arrested
still
for possession.
Huge numbers of people are being arrested, and we can see that in terms of the raids on the shops.
Yep.
In our own city here in Toronto.
And that's
downtown.
costing us a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to
yeah.
hold somebody in a jail rather than get them into a treatment program and help them improve their life.
Yeah, or in the case of marijuana, just let them
Just
go.
leave
and
them alone.
Leave the party alone. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Just leave them alone.
Yeah. I mean, what? But yet, I mean, and then maybe this all ties together with what's happening south of the border, because yet the popularity of Trudeau is just like through the roof. Like if the polls say that if there was an election tomorrow, he'd win like 82% of the seats. I mean, basically just decimate the other parties. I mean, I guess taking your shirt off works, or I guess being cute works, and
Posing for selfies.
Yeah, and talking about queer issues, the attack on AIDS, the attack on AIDS frontline services.
Some of those organizations will have to close because of these.
Yeah,
cuts.
say a little
They're
bit
so
more
bad.
about that, because that truly is shocking. And I think, he had a lot of support from the queer community. Trudeau had support, obviously, around, brought in gender identity and gender expression, which we've had in Ontario since 2012. Planning on bringing it in, hopefully getting it through the Senate this time. So this all looked very positive. And then this attack. Say more.
And the attack, the cuts came, these federal cuts to these treatment programs came almost within days of his announcement, and which he got a lot of press for, of the injection of funds to the Global Fund. For any readers or for any listeners who are listening and don't know what the Global Fund is, it was set up at the height of the AIDS pandemic, I think in the late 90s and early 2000s, to find a way to get all countries together, all developed countries together, wealthy countries, to put a big fund together to help people in places like Africa and the Middle East, and where they can't get treatment programs. So just a big injection from Canada into the Global Fund, which is great. But at the same time, he cuts our local programs. He cuts our treatment programs on the ground. These are like Aboriginal community programs, harm reduction, treatment programs, street nurses, these kinds of things, like the people who are literally on the ground, the front lines. I'm hearing from, I see my Facebook feed is just riddled with frustrated care workers and AIDS activists. And what's really frustrating is there's been very little coverage of this from mainstream media. There's been a Star article of this, but it really doesn't point the finger at who's responsible, which is Trudeau and the federal government. These came direct. It's a majority government. Nothing happens without his and the government's consent. These aren't just arbitrary cuts that came out of nowhere or left over from the Harper government. These are from Trudeau. These are cuts from him.
And the blood ban, too.
And the blood ban is still in effect.
Yeah, talk about that, because, again, listeners probably aren't hearing any of this. So.
No. It's against a legacy from the AIDS pandemic that gay men can't donate blood. Well, Trudeau promised during the election that he would get rid of this ban, and all he has done is shrink the amount of time that gay men have to be celibate, basically. So now it's a year. So now the idea that gay men must not have sex for a full year is still discriminatory, because nobody asks that of straight couples. In a day and age when we are testing every single vial of blood, that is unnecessary. And we know that living in Canada, we do have the privileges of the drug cocktail and the best quality care for people living with AIDS or HIV positive. That when your count is really low, when you're on the medication and you are treatment, your viral load is incredibly low that you can't even. Your risk of transmission is almost zero. So this blood ban, as it sits right now in Canada, is completely unnecessary, and all it does is foster more discrimination.
Yeah. Something was brought to our attention, I guess this segues into the provincial too, was that, the morning after pill too, for those who've had unprotected sex, is ridiculously expensive.
It is.
And not covered by
Nope.
a lot of drug plans.
No.
Which again
It's
makes
like $40, I think.
there was one, because this gay man told me about this. It costs around $500.
What?
Like, yes, it's yeah. Yeah, it's
Wow.
really shocking. It's
Is that
really
the pharmaceutical company have just raised the price?
this is, if you're not on a drug plan, this is what you pay if you've had unprotected sex, and there's a risk of HIV transmission. There's a drug available that will help you with that. The morning after, similar to women.
So it's a morning. So I didn't realize that
Yeah,
pill was so
yeah.
expensive.
No, I raised it here with the health minister, just asking what's up. I mean, this is shocking in terms of trying to prevent transmission.
It's like PrEP too, right?
Yeah.
PrEP.
Yeah.
PrEP is for any listeners who don't know what PrEP is. PrEP is basically the HIV vaccine. It's been developed, and it's very controversial right now because they're trying to get it into the hands of people in sub-Saharan Africa and places where, especially women who maybe don't have any control over what their husbands bring home, right? Because there's still obviously a lot of deep-seated homophobia and internal shame in places in Africa that if their men are gay, they tend to usually have a wife still at home. And so that's one of the ways that AIDS and HIV is spread. So PrEP, if PrEP was available to people in places in Africa, especially the concentrated cities like Kampala and Uganda, we might be able to take a dent off AIDS and the spread of HIV, which is such a huge problem still in Africa. We may be in a time in North America where we're looking at a life without death of AIDS. They don't have that benefit in places in Africa. So PrEP would be really great, but we can't get drugs into bodies. It's the same problem we had in the 80s because of the cost and because of the access.
Again, shocking. So again, the sunny days in Ottawa is kind of, the reality is kind of flying under the radar a little bit. I mean, I've seen some coverage, sort of somewhat critical, but there's still honeymoon days there, clearly, in terms of, what we had under Harper and the reality we're facing now under Trudeau. I mean, it's
not much different in a lot of
yeah,
ways, right?
well, our same climate change targets, and still way off any hope of meeting them, even at ridiculously, low as they are. So there's that. I gather they're having a follow-up meeting from Paris and Marrakesh, which will be a joke because, I mean, I don't know who's actually on target to meet their targets. Certainly not.
What's the point of having a target if everybody's just ignoring it?
Yeah.
And if it's not, and maybe your listeners didn't realize, but we actually passed a really critical point in the warming of this planet about a month ago, where we will never see below 1.5 ever again. And 2 degrees is that critical, that once we pass 2 degrees for a sustained multiple months, there's no turning back. We can't stem the flow of this warming, and we're basically looking at worse and worse and worse, and then it just starts to rapidly increase, especially as the glaciers melt on the poles.
But okay, I mean that's something maybe we'll deal with. We've just got a few minutes before we're going to go to break, and we're going to bring Ashley into this conversation.
But it's like the politicians don't hear the science. Is where I was going with this.
Yeah. I think it's almost like they're incapable of moving. It's almost like sometimes it feels like we're on the Titanic and we can't turn around. Like momentum is just taking us forward. But here's I mean, Americans, we can say, look at their election campaign. They're not nice. Some of them aren't nice people. No, they're not. Canadians were nice. Like I was at a housing forum the other day. There's been no housing built, new affordable housing really to speak of much in the last several decades. The governments, both federal and provincial, have done virtually nothing, and the city doesn't have any money to do anything. And so that's where we're at housing. And yet all these housing activists were politely clapping the minister, federal and provincial. And, it was organized by John Tory, and it was all very nice. And there were croissants and muffins and coffee. And, I don't get why people aren't storming the Bastille now. Like, where is the righteous anger? Where's the righteous anger on campuses where students are paying the highest tuitions, getting most debt, and, no action, and yet this when Canadian Federation of Students calls for general march, few show up. I mean, why don't we have where's the anger around all these issues? What would you say?
I wish I knew. I mean, I see that visceral anger directed at people like Professor Jordan Peterson here on U of T campus, which is legitimately so.
Yeah.
I understand where that anger and
listen, on my own Facebook feed, I had to ban a whole bunch of people after that. People saying, "Oh, well, he's just exercising his freedom of speech." I mean, please. There's actually, and this is about Bill 16 federally, but the reality is we have a Ontario Human Rights Code, and he's already in violation of that. Yeah. So we could take him to that tribunal. And somebody please, hint.
But shouldn't it be a student, though? A student who feels personally violated by
I mean, this is, we have gender identity and gender expression in our Ontario Human Rights Code. Yes, people are due their appropriate pronouns. That's what they are. That's their right to be called who they are. Yeah. And he's violating that.
But you notice there's a lot of misunderstanding as well. Mostly obviously on his part, but also on some of the journalists' part too. Like this idea and he started to spread this misinformation, saying that if he misgenders somebody, that he's going to be hauled into court and thrown in jail. I'm like, you're a professor. Haven't you not read the legislation? I noticed Carol Off at CBC made the same mistake, just going off what he said, and she just repeated what he said without double checking it, which I love Carol Off. That really upset me. But this idea that misgendering will be a hate crime is wrong. It's absolutely wrong.
Of course.
I mean, maybe if he was beating one of his students to death with a hammer and he was in the process misgendering them, okay, maybe that would be a factor in sentencing. But this is a professor. I mean, and he has this dramatically wrong reading of a really critical piece of legislation that he is fighting against. I mean, how is this university allowing this person to have this job?
Yeah, and apparently the demonstration that took place, was attacked by folk on campus. So, so much for the...
And slurs. Did you listen to the video? That there was a lot of trans slurs, I heard tranny and some horrible things said that should not be said on university campuses.
And you remember that, I mean, we're talking about a population where 50% have tried to kill themselves, 50% live under the poverty line. This is an incredibly marginalized group of people.
There's a reason why they're protected.
Who are protected. They are protected in all ways, and yet this so-called professor is flying in the face of that and getting news out of it. I mean, this is shocking.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just say let's call him Sally and let's call him she and let's use the wrong pronoun with him. See how he likes it.
Make up a title.
Absolutely. We're gonna take a little bit of a break here on Three Women. Hear a tune, pay some bills, and come on back with another of the A-Team, Ashley Csanady. Talk to you soon. Hi, Ashley. Welcome to Three Women.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's always a pleasure. So we've just been sounding off about broad topics, but first of all, let's talk about the cesspool that is the American election 2016. Do you want to weigh in on that? What is going on? Oh.
I'm just waiting for it to end at this point. But I think the most terrifying part of it is the effects it's going to have after this. Even if Donald Trump loses, a lot of the vitriol he's brought to the surface isn't going anywhere, and we're going to see that continue. I mean, this weekend, KKK was protesting a football player who protested the national anthem, and I don't think they would have felt so emboldened to do that before Trump. And so I think there's some really scary consequences for the long term of what his campaign has brought to the surface in America.
Oh, absolutely. We see the rise of militias, and needless to say, women everywhere are concerned. I would be if I were down there with what passes as sexual assault and not sexual assault right now. Yeah,
and that's such an interesting debate to be having too. I mean, the way they've turned it around on Bill Clinton. I mean, there are some interesting questions to be explored there about how some of the allegations against him would have been handled today versus 20, 30, 40 years ago. But these aren't, dozens of new women coming forward. These are things we've heard before. And I find it really interesting that they have proxies for Hillary going after Trump on this instead of her herself. She said a few things, but the strongest denouncements have come from Michelle Obama and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Tim Kaine. So it's put her in an interesting spot as the first female candidate who sort of has to be careful what she says or doesn't say about this file, which is really unfortunate, actually.
And I was speaking about this earlier, but John Oliver did a funny thing on kind of all the candidates. But one of the memes that was going around that I particularly liked was, somebody describing themselves as saying, I feel like a child whose parents are fighting over my custody when I really just want to go live at grandma's house. And people they're uninspired. I mean, this is a feminist show, and we should be rah rah. We're looking at potentially the first woman president of the United States. That's exciting, but somehow that enthusiasm's been dampened by, the WikiLeaks stuff and everything else. What's your take on that?
I'm so torn on it because I think the Clintons have been in the spotlight for so long. Of course, they do have a lot of baggage, but then you look at some of the top fact-checking websites like PolitiFact have shown that Hillary, of all the contemporary politicians, is like the second most truthful in her public statements. And I found that really interesting compared to the narrative that's been set up against her. And there is this part of me that feels like some of it is a double standard because she's so loathed both on the far left, who were disappointed in her husband's presidency, and of course on the right. So, I mean, she's just in a tough spot. And then to sort of compound it all, there's the extra level of scrutiny that female candidates always face. I mean, Donald Trump has been divorced 3 times, has kids by however many women, has cheated on all of his wives openly. And if that was a woman, they would never have made it even into the primaries.
Oh yeah. Well, think about it. I mean, if she was standing up there with children from several different husbands, they wouldn't have gone down so well in the American press, I'm sure. Moving on up here, because I know you just have a very limited time, Ashley, and I thank you for it. But moving on up across the border, the Liberals are polling in record numbers federally. I mean, we're looking at if they had an election tomorrow federally, they'd have like 82% of the seats or something. And yet, really, when you look at the actual record of the federal government, it's not that different from Harper, really. I mean, the same climate change goals. Marijuana is still illegal, and people are still getting arrested. The First Nations, they're not as happy as, they got some money, but not nearly what they were looking for. They got some acknowledgement, but again, not nearly what they were looking for. What's your take on, our new prime minister? And again, maybe the American scene plays into this a bit.
I think that I think part of it is, the rosy, dichotomy between our current federal government, at least the perception of him, versus Donald Trump and the tire fire in the States is probably helping his popularity. But I also think it might be the fact that he hasn't done very much that has seemed to have helped him, which is an odd thing to say, but it's easy to sort of skirt along at your new popularity if you haven't done anything controversial. And a lot of the things he promised to do that would be controversial have not, seen that much action. We've seen something we actually saw the Liberals do a lot provincially, where they've, instead of acting on campaign promises, promised to consult on them. And I find that absolutely fascinating because it's sort of an interesting playbook where you can sort of keep some of your interest groups quiet for now as you decide what you actually want to do without rocking the boat.
Possibly. I mean, they have moved ahead with, this, what was described by some as a climate bomb in BC. Haida, I know there are looking at, it has the potential to become a kind of like a North Dakota's situation where First Nations come up against a new fossil fuel project. He did sign off on that, which is, again, not seemingly in keeping with Mr. Climate Change concern. But again, it doesn't seem to affect his ratings. So you may be right on that.
Yeah, it's sort of, a lot of it is stuff that's pretty wonky, too. I mean, it's hard to get people really upset about a pipeline that's still in the approval process. We've been hearing about these for years. I think one of the things I find really interesting and almost frustrating is how much cred he keeps getting on the feminist front. And we really haven't seen any action on it.
Hey, we're selling arms to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, other than the missing murdered Indigenous women's inquiry. And that does sound like it's going well, like it's a phenomenal step. I'm glad it's happening. But what about a review of the criminal code? I mean, we're talking about legalizing marijuana, but has anyone sat down and done the kind of work that has happened in Ontario where they've made little tweaks to the law that make it easier for women to break leases, that make it easier for women to sue people who have sexually assaulted them, removing statutes of limitations? There are things like that, smaller tweaks that can be made to the criminal code in the short term as perhaps they mold something longer term, like we have mental health courts now. Well, what if we we have domestic violence courts. What if we expanded domestic violence courts to also include certain types of sexual violence? Like, I think that there are a lot of positive moves they could make that they just seem to be too tentative to do. I mean, CBC today came out and said that they have hundreds of appointments they haven't filled. It's almost like they're hamstrung with indecision on some things. They're too scared of rocking the boat, and then at the same time, the scandals they have gotten are the usual liberal concerns about entitlement, and that doesn't help them at all either. It'd be much better if the controversies they were creating were from actually doing something. I mean, even their supposedly controversial climate plan is not that radical compared to other jurisdictions, and is still putting a lot of it right onto the provinces.
Yeah, absolutely. And really on the LGBT file, we were talking earlier about the blood ban still in place, a little tweaking, but still in place. And the cuts to local AIDS frontline agencies is quite shocking. I mean, but yet the community doesn't seem to, it's almost like people, we're still sort of concerned about speaking up about it because, we know things could get worse, or we look south of the border or something. I'm not sure what it is, but there doesn't seem to be the pushback around these moves from the federal government that there would have been for sure if Harper done them.
Oh, yeah, and you see that all the time. There'll be something that they'll do that you're sitting there and it's like, oh, well, Harper would have gotten like 3 days of outrage if they'd done that. Not answering questions, let's say, if they have someone from China with them, or like you said, promising to do something about the blood ban and then not doing anything. It's a pretty interesting time to be sort of watching them coast on this honeymoon when they haven't really done all that much. Like, I'm really fascinated to see when this shift in public opinion comes, and maybe they'll keep going with this sort of incrementalism so that they can continue to coast on this. Or maybe when the American election is over, people will stop just being like, oh, thank God we don't have that, and start taking a harder look back home. I mean, it's fascinating to watch what people are interested in these days. When you look at traffic, you can have a couple really interesting Government of Canada stories beside whatever Donald Trump has said or done lately. And let me tell you, when I see those numbers, people are not paying a ton of attention to domestic news right now.
Yeah, that's true. And just very quickly, I know you only have a few minutes. Provincially, that's your bailiwick. Kathleen Wynne's numbers like a stone. What's that about?
So I think a lot of chickens have finally come home to roost for them. I think a lot of the current anger is over Hydro. Like, I really think that's fueling a lot of it, because I had a pollster tell me something really interesting over the summer, that the Hydro One sale itself isn't so much the problem as people felt like they'd never see it from her. And they felt like, maybe, let's say Sandra Patel had won in some alternate universe, the Liberal leadership in 2013. It's kind of move they might have expected from sort of that wing of the Liberals, but I think a lot of people felt that they were electing someone who wasn't going the privatization track, especially when you look at the way the 2014 campaign shook out over the idea of the role of the public service and the role of government. So that, combined with a really hot summer and some really high hydro bills, I think has boiled over a lot of anger that has sort of been simmering, towards this government for a while. But I don't know if they're fully counted out yet. I went to a conference a few weeks ago for the energy sector, and they had a pollster give a presentation about the state of play in politics, and we're sort of showing how this breakdown is right now. And overall, provincially, her numbers might be like that. But if you actually break it down to regional areas, they could still cling to power with the right, if some of their sort of bigger, loftier promises from the past couple of years start to actually happen in the right areas, because the depths of the anger tend to be concentrated in places where they already don't hold any seat.
Yeah, and also, quite frankly, we've seen this before, and election campaigns do matter, so they can make all the difference. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. Thanks for your word. Always a pleasure. Part of the A team here on Three Women. Rock on. We'll see you around.
Okay.
Bye, Ashley.
Bye.
So back to Andrea in the studio. You heard what Ashley had to say. Again, for those of you who don't know her, of course, she's a writer for the National Post and a commentator, and usually on things provincial, but obviously on things everywhere.
She's been doing a lot of social issues, covering feminism and some of these social movements at the National Post, which is so needed, and her voice is so valued.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, a delight always. So
she said one thing I did want to comment on.
Yeah.
She said that when majority governments, she's talking a bit about majority governments not doing enough, and like how Trudeau had, he's really riding the coattails of that honeymoon and not really doing anything. I mean, some of the things we can point to, like the census and the missing and murdered Aboriginal women report, like there are things that probably would have happened even without a majority government. Like there was enough groundswell of support for these things that really didn't need a majority government to make these things happen. But the key issues that really require a majority government, like you and I were talking the other day, like those bold, brave decisions, he just hasn't done. But neither has someone like a Rachel Notley either.
True that.
And so, she was handed this, gift on a platter, this massive NDP majority, where she could have stepped out the next day and made sweeping changes to that province, and she just didn't. And when our progressive leadership is letting us down, it really
let's talk about
me.
the Rachel Notley phenomenon for a minute, because clearly coming out of the Edmonton Convention and the New Democratic Party, there was some pretty strong decisions made to talk about the LEAP manifesto, to tell Tom Mulcair that his leadership, thank you, but enough. But you really kind of got this divided party. You got people cheering for. You got people cheering for Rachel on one side, and then you got people cheering for Stephen Lewis on the other side, and they were basically saying dramatically different things about the climate.
Yeah.
So what do you see ahead there? Because I mean, again, some would say, well, Rachel, she's brought in some good climate change things but she's also shilling for pipelines. She's getting into Twitter fights and battles with Naomi Klein.
I know. I mean, I'm at the point now where I don't think that I don't think you could be a pipeline champion at all in 2016. Like, you can't be a progressive and be supporting pipelines at all. And I would go even a step further, and I think it might have been Glenn Greenwald who said this, that, if you are in any way championing pipelines or these climate bombs, these carbon bombs, you are essentially the same as a climate change denier, because we have the science.
You're really a neoconservative.
Yeah, we know what's going to happen. So why do anything to make that happen faster? I mean, we know the tar sands in Alberta are one of the biggest emitters of CO2 on the planet. It's one of the worst. It's like right up there, second to Saudi Arabia. Yeah. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, and what's really kind of shocking to me is that just on pure economic grounds, not even talking morality or climate change, if you've got a province that's essentially a one-horse town, that's a one-industry place, and cost of oil went down, bang, people are out of work, their housing prices are halved, etc., wouldn't you want to move away from that one, issue economy? That seems to me pretty dramatic red flag when the cost of oil means, you're going to get reelected or not, or people are going to have jobs or not. Not the place you want to be anywhere, independent of the issues, around oil. So there's an incredible opportunity there to have moved into dramatically something else. Many have said move into green energy, move into
renewables.
Productions and renewables. So
solar.
Again, very, very depressing. But of course, there's that thing in every political party. You got a rah behind the person who's selected, and she's the only premier that's an NDPer now. So.
Oh, I know. I don't think she's going to win again, regardless. I mean, I think that there's enough, hatred towards the NDP government in Alberta, and also the industry is so powerful in Alberta that
so powerful everywhere.
It's powerful everywhere, but in Alberta particularly, it really drives the economy there. And if she had to come out in day two, like a lot of people wanted her to do, and just begin the process of shutting down the tar sands, can't happen overnight because it's too deeply embedded within the economy there. But if she'd have said, "This is what we're working towards," her popularity would have tanked, but at least she would have done the right thing.
And she had 4 years. This is the problem with political will.
Popularity already tanked.
A problem with political will is, majority government is a rare. it's a rare enough thing, and it really is carte blanche to do anything you want. Nobody can stop you. You've got 4 years, you can do anything you want. And it's interesting because when you look at, for example, Tommy Douglas and what he accomplished with majority governments in Saskatchewan, i.e. Medicare, we wouldn't have it without him. Or you look at social democratic countries in Europe where all it took was enough social democrats to have free post-secondary, free childcare, you name it.
A livable income.
And then the reality is, as we've seen in politics everywhere, is that people are going to run against it because nobody wants to pay for Medicare. That's a real sales job, which is ongoing as we speak. The health ministers are meeting. The federal government doesn't want to give them any more money to run healthcare. And there's still this privatization move from the right. But most Canadians like their Medicare. They like their free healthcare, and they don't want to have to pay for it. So once you've got these things in place,
it's hard to get rid of them.
It's hard to get rid of them. And that's political will. And it seems like it's in short supply.
Yeah.
Seems like it's in short supply. Now, the Democrats in the States, to loop back to them, they sort of have an excuse because they haven't controlled, they haven't really controlled the Congress for a while.
It's been deadlocked.
So,
but this time around, they might get it back.
Yeah,
they might get the Senate and Congress.
Now, that will be interesting because if the backlash against Trump is such that she does do that, and this is this wave, then there's no excuses. Then let's see the action.
But I'm not confident that Hillary will. Because that's where Hillary being in bed with Wall Street and all these banks and corporations, that's where we're like, if she's given the opportunity, if she has that one moment, that chance that she'll never have again, no government will ever have again, will she take it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Very interesting. So to get back to Canada for a minute, we've spent a lot of time on Americans, and of course, who can blame us? We're so close, and it's so bizarre.
And so important,
so bizarre.
too. Before we move on, though, I do want to give a plug to a movie that's on Netflix right now.
Okay.
It's called The 13th.
Oh.
And it's Ava DuVernay. She's an incredibly important new filmmaker working right now, Black woman in the States. She made this film incredibly critical at this moment for anybody following the American election. Watch The 13th. It talks about the 13th Amendment and how slavery never really ended, and how the criminal justice system, the mass incarcerated system that the Americans have right now, which is so front and center this election, it's incredibly eye-opening. I encourage everybody listening to this program to watch that film.
Okay, cool. Duly noted. So moving back to Canada. And looking at and just finishing up, because we started with Rachel Notley, and to look at progressive movements. So we've talked about Trudeau. No, not that much has changed really from the Harper days. It feels different, but is it different? And then you've got the NDP, presumably at a crossroads now, and you've got both the Conservatives and the NDP looking for new leadership. What do they need to survive, both of those opposition parties? Because right now, if there was an election, neither of them would much. What do they need in leadership to survive? What do you think?
Bold, brave action. More than just lukewarm, watered down promises that are maybe had some traction in the last election. The playbook needs to be scrapped. Like we need progressive leadership that is actually progressive.
Now Mulcair just came out and called himself a pacifist, feminist, socialist. A little late there.
He's not though. We already know the man. Like
a little late. It's
not like he's new on the scene.
On the Conservative side, we've got somebody trying to mirror Trump, among other things.
I think we're going to see a lot of Trump mirrors in the years to come, frankly.
Yeah, it's truly shocking. And I think Ashley was spot on there in talking about, and you too, after the election, even if he loses, this has changed the face of American politics. Yep. So it really has unleashed the id in a sense. Like you get to say all those things that before you might have held your tongue and thought twice. Now you get to blurt it out. And
but the racism was always there, right? Like that's really important to note that, the racism, they may have been afraid to blurt their tongue out, but they felt it. And that racism was always there. Trump just tapped into it and gave them license to say it.
Yeah,
That's
and
all.
and honestly, and the misogyny was always there too.
Always there.
And although the pushback is yes, no, this is not locker room talk, and
No.
not all men act like sexual predators. Obviously ridiculous, but again,
All you have to
the
do is-
misogyny is very much there,
And classism,
and
right?
rape culture is very much real. Yeah.
And classism. I mean,
classism.
if,
Yep.
if you are a white, wealthy rapist, chances are you'll get off.
Yeah, as he
You'll
said,
walk
I'm
away.
a star. I can do anything I want. Yeah.
Brock Turner, that rich kid from university who raped a woman behind a dumpster.
Yeah.
He got a couple months in prison.
Yeah, yeah.
Meanwhile, we see black and brown people going to jail for the rest of their lives
Yeah.
for petty crimes.
Yeah. If we're plugging films on Netflix, one that I would highly recommend called The Class Divide. It's a documentary coming out of New York City on the changes in Chelsea, where you've got the World School costs $45,000 to $50,000 a year per student for elementary and high school. On one side of the street, on the other side, projects. And that coexistence in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world, and what it's doing to kids on both sides. It's interviews with the kids on both sides. Fascinating documentary coming out of New York called Class Divide. And it does talk about exactly that, because you do have kids of color that are going to the School of the World, or whatever it's called, paying $45,000 to $50,000. And one of them says, it's not. It is about my class. This is what this is about, because if your parents go to Yale and your grandparents went to Harvard, and really interesting. So the intersection of class and race is a potent mix south of the border, and a potent mix up here, where, lest we forget, we invented apartheid and shipped it off to other places in the world with our residential schools and our treaties.
And all those, and many would argue that system is still very much in place in a lot of places. I mean, we just have to look at Grassy Narrows, who are forced to drink poisoned water while the government of Ontario sells off the clean water to Nestle.
And as we speak, up in Gogama, the First Nations are shutting down a highway there. Again, not reported on. Nobody seems to care in the mainstream press, but they're shutting down a highway because after the CN spill of oil there, years later, still not cleaned up. And so they've given up asking governments or CN to act. They're now shutting down a highway up there. So this is happening in our provinces. It's happening not far from us. What should we do about it? We've got a few minutes left. Andrea Houston, tell us, what should we be doing to make a better world?
Oh, to use Bernie's line, we need a political revolution. We need Bernie. We need more Bernies. We need more of that line of thinking. We need more people to step up. We need more